When his stepmother kicked him out on his 18th birthday, she told him his only inheritance was a worthless, collapsed root cellar on a forgotten patch of land. What he found inside would unravel a lifetime of lies. If you've ever been told you're not worth much, or that the things you care about are useless, then I think this story is for you. Stick with me, and if it connects, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we talk about things like this here. We talk about finding value where no one else thought to look. The cardboard box was already sagging. I'd packed in a hurry, not because I was afraid of forgetting something, but because I was afraid if I stopped moving, the cold would finally seep into my bones. Brenda stood in the doorway of my room, arms crossed, her expression as flat and unforgiving as a winter sky. It wasn't my room, not really. It had been my room for 10 years, since my dad married her, but it had always felt like I was borrowing it. The posters on the wall were held up with the kind of sticky tack that wouldn't damage the paint. The books on the shelf were neatly aligned, no dog-eared pages. I had learned early on to leave no trace. "That's it?" she asked. Her voice was thin, sharp. It always sounded like she was disappointed in the air for not being good enough to breathe. I nodded, taping the box shut with a piece of packing tape I'd found in the junk drawer. The sound was obscenely loud in the quiet house. Rip, squeal. It sounded like something tearing. "Yeah, that's everything." "Good. The bus leaves at 4. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the bare patch of wall where my favorite poster used to be. A faint rectangle, cleaner than the rest of the wall, was the only evidence it had ever existed. She probably hated that, too. She pushed a thick, folded document and a single, rust-pitted key across the dresser. They skidded on the polished wood and stopped near the edge. "This is yours." "Your father's lawyer sent it. It's the deed to that piece of dirt your mother left you, in Coulter Creek." I stared at the items. I hadn't known my mother left me anything. My father never spoke of her, not after he met Brenda. Her name, Sarah, was a ghost in our house, a word that, if spoken, would make the temperature drop. All I had of her was a single, faded photograph I kept tucked in the back of a book, a young woman with my eyes and a sad, knowing smile. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's nothing," Brenda said, her tone dismissive. "A 1/4 acre of rocks and weeds upstate. There's an old root cellar on it, mostly collapsed. That's it. No house, no water, no value. The lawyer said you could probably get a few hundred for it from the lumber company next door for access rights. I'd take it. It's more than you've got now." The key was heavy in my hand. It was an old skeleton key, the kind you see in movies, its teeth worn smooth. It felt ancient, important. It felt like the opposite of nothing. I picked up the deed. Legalese swam before my eyes, but I saw my name, Leo Vance, and my mother's, Sarah Vance, and the words Coulter Creek. "Happy birthday, Leo," Brenda said, and the words were so devoid of warmth they might as well have been stones. She turned and walked away, her footsteps silent on the hallway carpet. The finality of it was absolute. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't wish me luck. She just closed a door that had been closing slowly for the 2 years since my dad died. I stood there for a long time, the key cold against my palm, the box at my feet. The silence of the house pressed in. It was the same silence I'd lived with for years, but now it felt different. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of possibility. This house was no longer a place where my future could happen. My 18 years here had been erased. I was a ghost leaving a house that was already haunted. I picked up my box, which held everything I thought I owned, and the key, which represented everything I didn't know I had. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. The air outside was damp and smelled of rain. It felt like freedom, which was terrifying. It tasted like grief. The bus ride was 6 hours of watching the world blur past the window. Gray towns bled into green countryside, then back into gray. I sat with my box on the seat beside me, a silent, flimsy companion. My entire life contained in weakening cardboard. I kept my hand in my pocket, wrapped around the key. Its sharp edges dug into my palm, a small, grounding pain that kept the larger, formless ache at bay. I replayed Brenda's words in my head. A worthless root cellar. Why would my mother, the woman from the photograph, leave me that? Why not a letter, a keepsake, something to hold on to? My father. I tried to summon his face, his voice, but the memories were already starting to fade, worn down by the constant, quiet friction of Brenda's presence. He had been a good man, I think. A quiet man who loved fishing and old movies, but he was weak in a way I only understood after he was gone. He let Brenda's coldness fill the spaces between us. He never told me about the land. He never told me about my mother. Was he protecting me, or was he just afraid of the argument? I'd never know. The questions felt like stones in my gut. The bus groaned to a stop in what I assumed was Coulter Creek. There was no station, just a covered bench next to a gas station with a flickering sign. The air was different here, sharper. It smelled of pine and wet earth. I was the only one who got off. The bus hissed and pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the encroaching dusk, leaving me utterly and completely alone. The weight of it was staggering. I was 18 years old. I had one box, $74, a deed to a worthless piece of land, and a key that probably opened nothing. I asked the cashier at the gas station, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, for directions to the address on the deed. She squinted at the paper. Oh, the old Miller property. Nobody's lived out that way in years. It's a good 2-mile walk. You sure you want to be heading there now? Supposed to rain something fierce tonight. I'm sure, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. It's family land. She gave me a long, searching look, a mix of pity and concern. All right, son, follow this road east. When you see the old collapsed bridge, take the dirt path just before it. It'll wind up the hill. Can't miss it. It's the only thing up there. The walk was just as she described. The pavement gave way to a cracked, weed-choked road, and then to a dirt path that was more mud than dirt. The sky had turned a deep, bruised purple. The trees on either side of the path were tall and dark, their branches clawing at the clouds. The air grew colder. I clutched the box tighter. It was getting heavier with every step, filled not just with my few possessions, but with the weight of my uncertainty. What was I doing here? Brenda was right. I should have stayed in the city, found a shelter, tried to get a job. Coming here was a fool's errand, a pilgrimage to a place of nothingness. Then I saw it. Through a break in the trees, a small clearing on the side of a gently sloping hill. The land was overgrown with brambles and tall grass, choked with the kind of stubborn life that thrives on neglect. And there, built into the hillside, was the root cellar. It was exactly as Brenda had described it, and yet, it was more. The entrance was framed with large, moss-covered stones, like the entrance to some ancient tomb. The wooden door was thick and weathered, grayed by years of sun and rain, with a large, black iron hinge. It wasn't collapsed, not entirely. It was sagging, tired, but it was still standing. It looked less like a ruin and more like something sleeping. A wave of something strange washed over me. Not disappointment, not hope exactly. It was a feeling of recognition, a deep, resonant hum in my chest. I felt like I had been walking toward this place my whole life. The rain started then, a soft, persistent drizzle that quickly soaked through my thin jacket. I put my box down under the slight overhang of the stone entrance and approached the door. A heavy iron lock, rusted nearly solid, held it shut. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was trembling, from the cold, or from something else, I wasn't sure. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted, gritty with rust. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. It was all a joke, a final, cruel trick. I was locked out of the one thing I had left. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath that smelled of rain and damp earth, and pushed harder. I put my whole body into it, all my frustration, my grief, my 18 years of feeling locked out of my own life. There was a loud, groaning crack, the sound of metal surrendering. The lock sprang open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled the heavy lock free and then gripped the iron handle on the door. It was cold and rough against my skin. I pulled. The door scraped against the stone floor, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. It moved an inch, then another. I dug my heels into the mud and pulled with everything I had. Slowly, reluctantly, the door swung inward, opening into a square of perfect, silent darkness. The air that drifted out was cool and smelled of soil, stone, and something else. Something like time, like memory. I stood there, rain dripping from my hair, staring into the dark. I was terrified of what was inside. I was terrified of what wasn't. Taking another shaky breath, I pulled out the small flashlight I kept on my keychain. Its beam was weak, a pale, trembling circle in the oppressive blackness, but it was enough. I stepped across the threshold, my sneakers crunching on a floor of packed earth and fallen debris. The door was heavy, and I left it open a crack, a sliver of gray twilight that made the darkness inside feel even deeper. The cellar was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were lined with rough-hewn stone, damp and slick to the touch. The air was thick and still. Empty wooden shelves, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, lined 2 of the walls. A few rotted vegetable crates were piled in a corner, spilling out a black, soil-like substance that was probably the petrified remains of potatoes from a lifetime ago. It was exactly what you'd expect. An empty, forgotten hole in the ground. My heart sank. Brenda was right. It was worthless. A wave of despair, cold and sharp, washed over me. I was a fool. An orphan clinging to a rusty key and a fantasy. My flashlight beam danced across the floor, illuminating nothing but dirt and decay. I was about to turn and leave, to go back to the road and stick out my thumb and go anywhere but here, when the light caught something. Not a glint of metal or glass. It was a shape. In the far corner, almost hidden behind the rotting crates, was a box. It wasn't wood. It looked like an old military footlocker, made of dark green metal, with heavy-duty latches on the front. It was out of place. Everything else in here was decay and nature reclaiming its own. This box was manufactured. It was deliberate. I knelt beside it, my knees sinking slightly into the damp earth. It was heavy, solid. The latches were stiff but not locked. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with them. One sprung open with a loud click that echoed in the small space. Then the second. I paused, my hand hovering over the lid. This was it, the moment of truth. Either this was a box of more nothing, or it was something else. I didn't let myself imagine what. Hope was a dangerous thing, and I'd had too little of it to waste. I lifted the lid. The hinges groaned in protest. The beam of my flashlight fell inside. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't filled with gold or jewels. It wasn't a treasure chest. It was filled with paper. Stacks of letters tied in bundles with faded ribbon. A few leather-bound journals. A collection of manila folders thick with documents. And on the very top, nestled in a bed of what looked like dried lavender, was a single, sealed envelope. In elegant looping script, it said my name, Leo. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. The paper was thick, creamy, and felt warm to the touch, as if it held some residual heat from the person who wrote it. I turned it over. There was no other writing. I carefully broke the wax seal, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The same handwriting covered the page. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you are 18 years old. It means you have come home. Happy birthday, my son. I know I have a universe of explaining to do. I know you must have so many questions and probably so much anger. You have a right to it. All of it. But I hope, when you are done reading, you will find it in your heart to understand, maybe even to forgive. I am writing this from a hospital bed. They tell me I don't have much time, and I have to believe them. The weakness in my bones feels ancient. But I am not afraid. The only thing that frightens me is the thought of you growing up without knowing who I was or how much I loved you. My love for you, Leo, is the one thing in this world I am sure of. It is bigger than this sickness, bigger than this hospital, bigger than death itself." I had to stop. My eyes were burning. I swiped at them with the back of my muddy hand, smearing dirt across my face. I could feel the sobs building in my chest, hot and tight. I hadn't cried when my dad died. I hadn't cried when Brenda told me to leave. I had just gone numb, encased myself in ice. But this was a thawing. It was agony. I read on, the words blurring and sharpening through my tears. I had to leave you with your father. It was the hardest decision of my life, a choice that broke me into 1,000 pieces. But I was sick, and I knew I wouldn't get better. I couldn't let your first memories be of a mother who was fading away. And there were other reasons, more complicated ones, that you will find in the other letters. Reasons I had to protect you. Your father was a good man, but he was a gentle soul, and he was afraid. I knew he would give you a stable home, a life away from the fight I had found myself in. I made him promise he would tell you about me when you were old enough. I made him promise he would give you this key on your 18th birthday. I can only pray he kept his word, or that fate, in its strange way, has guided you here regardless. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. He hadn't kept his promise. Or maybe he had tried, and Brenda had shut him down. Another question I could never answer. This land, this cellar. It is not a palace, I know. Your stepmother probably told you it was worthless. In a way, she's right. Its monetary value is almost nothing. But its real value, Leo, is that it is ours. It is a piece of the world that belongs to you, free and clear. It is a place to stand. A place to start from. I bought it with the last of my savings because it was far away, forgotten, and safe. A place to keep things that needed keeping. This box is your real inheritance. It contains our story. It contains the truth. And it contains a choice. Read the letters. Read my journals. Look at the documents. Take your time. When you are done, you will understand everything. There is also a false bottom in this chest, a small gift to help you on your way. But the story is the most important thing. It is who you are. Do not let anyone ever take that from you. I see you in my mind's eye, a grown man. I hope you have your father's kind heart and forgive me a little of my stubborn fire. I hope you are happy. I hope you are safe. Know that I am with you. Every step of this journey, I am with you. All my love, forever, Mom. I folded the letter, my hands clumsy. The sobs I'd been holding back finally broke free. They were ragged, ugly sounds, torn from a place deep inside me that I didn't know existed. I wept for the mother I never knew. I wept for the father I had lost twice, once to death and again to his own silence. I wept for the lonely little boy who grew up in a cold, quiet house, believing he was an inconvenience. I wept because for the first time in my life, I felt a love that was unconditional, reaching for me across time and space from a dusty metal box in a hole in the ground. The small, weak beam of my flashlight died, plunging me into absolute darkness. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I sat there on the damp earth, clutching my mother's letter to my chest, and cried until I had nothing left. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, my body was stiff and cold, and a pale, watery light was filtering through the crack in the door. Morning. I had survived the night. I felt hollowed out, but also strangely calm. The storm of grief had passed, leaving a quiet, clean exhaustion in its wake. My first thought was of the box. I felt for it in the dim light, my fingers tracing the cool metal. It was real. The letter was real. I wasn't just Leo, the boy who was kicked out. I was Leo, the son of Sarah Vance, a woman with a story, a woman with stubborn fire. I spent the morning exploring the rest of the box's contents. I did as she said, taking my time. I organized the bundles of letters by date. They were a chronicle of her life, written to me. She wrote about falling in love with my father, a shy carpenter who could build anything but a solid argument. She wrote about my birth, the overwhelming, world-altering love she felt the first time she held me. She wrote about the town, Coulter Creek, and how she'd moved there for the clean air and quiet life, only to find something toxic lurking beneath the surface. Her journals told a different story. They were less personal, more investigative. My mother, I learned, had worked as a paralegal. She was smart, meticulous, and had a fierce sense of justice. She started noticing things in town: the unusual number of people getting sick, the strange taste of the water, the way the big corporation that owned the quarry upriver, a company called Northwood Ventures, seemed to own the town council, too. She started digging. The journals were filled with her notes, observations, interviews with sick residents who were too scared to speak up. She was building a case, piece by piece, in secret. Then I opened the manila folders. They were packed with documents, internal memos from Northwood Ventures, leaked by a whistleblower, water quality reports that had been buried by the county, medical records with names and dates blacked out, showing a clear pattern of rare cancers and respiratory illnesses clustered in the area downstream from the quarry. It was all there, a detailed, damning indictment of a company that had been poisoning a town for profit for over a decade. And my mother's name was on the list of the sick, the same rare leukemia that had taken so many others. The truth hit me like a physical blow. She didn't just get sick, she was poisoned. And she spent the last year of her life, while fighting for her own survival, gathering the evidence to make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. She had to leave me, not just because she was dying, but because she was afraid of what Northwood Ventures would do if they knew she had a son. A point of leverage, a weakness they could exploit. Leaving me with my father in another city was an act of protection. The land, the cellar, this box. It was her secret headquarters, her evidence locker, her final, desperate play for justice. My anger returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the helpless anger of a grieving boy. It was cold, sharp, and focused. It was a weapon. I thought of Brenda's casual dismissal, a worthless root cellar, a few hundred for access rights. I wondered if Northwood Ventures had approached her, if they knew about this land and wanted it, wanted to bury whatever was here for good. I remembered my mother's words. A choice. Finally, my hands trembling, I looked for the false bottom she mentioned. Along the inside edge of the footlocker, I found a small, almost invisible seam. I pressed on it, and a section of the metal floor popped up. Beneath it was a small, tightly packed compartment. Inside were stacks of cash, bound in paper bands. I counted it. $20,000. It was a fortune. More money than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to disappear. Enough to start a new life anywhere I wanted, to leave Coulter Creek and its ghosts behind me forever. And next to the money was one last letter. This one was shorter. Leo, this money is your escape, if you want it. Take it and go. Build a life for yourself. Be happy and safe. No one would blame you. I wouldn't blame you. But if you choose to stay, if you feel that fire I hope you have, this money is your ammunition. It's enough to hire a good lawyer, enough to start the fight. The name you need is Arthur Gable. He's a lawyer in town. He's old and cantankerous, but he's one of the few people I trusted. Show him what you found. The choice is yours, my son. Freedom or the fight. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. Know that my love is your armor. I sat back on my heels, the stacks of cash in my lap, the weight of the documents beside me. The air in the cellar felt heavy, charged with the gravity of the moment. I could hear my mother's voice in my head, feel her presence in this small, dark space she had carved out of the earth. Freedom or the fight. I could take the money and run. I could be anonymous. I could forget Coulter Creek, forget Northwood Ventures, forget the name Sarah Vance. I could survive. Or I could stay. I could use what she gave me to finish what she started. I could fight for her. For the people of this town. It wasn't really a choice. Not for the son of a woman with stubborn fire. The ice around my heart wasn't just thawed. It was gone. In its place, something new was burning. Let me pause here for a second. If you've made it this far, thank you. This part of the story, this moment of decision, is something I think a lot of us face in our lives, in big ways and small. You're handed a situation that feels impossible, and you're given two paths, the easy way out or the hard way through. Maybe it's a family secret, a tough career choice, or just the decision to finally stand up for yourself. If you've ever been there, in that moment where everything hangs in the balance, let me know in the comments. I read them all. Because I think it's important to remember that we're not alone in those moments. All right, let's get back to it. I had a choice to make. I packed everything carefully back into the footlocker, except for one of the thickest manila folders and the letter with the lawyer's name on it. I hid the box again, covering it with the rotting crates, making it look like it was part of the cellar's natural decay. I took 10 $20 bills from the hidden compartment and tucked them into my pocket. Then I walked out of the root cellar and into the daylight. The world looked different. The trees didn't seem menacing anymore. They seemed watchful, like silent guardians. The air felt clean and sharp in my lungs. I knew what I had to do. The town of Coulter Creek was small, the kind of place with one main street that served as its entire commercial district. A grocery store, a diner, a hardware store, and a few other tired-looking storefronts. Gable & Sons, attorneys at law, was housed in a small brick building with faded gold lettering on the window. The & Sons was crossed out with a thin, painted line. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, and a small bell chimed. The reception area was filled with mismatched furniture and smelled of old paper and coffee. A woman with a formidable perm and a kind smile looked up from her typewriter. "Can I help you, dear?" "I'm here to see Arthur Gable," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "My name is Leo Vance." Her eyes widened slightly at the name. "Vance? As in Sarah Vance's boy?" I nodded. A knot formed in my stomach. She knew my mother. "Well, I'll be," she whispered. She stood up. "He's in his office. Go on back. I think he'll want to see you." Arthur Gable was exactly as my mother had described him, old and cantankerous. He was a small, wiry man with a shock of white hair that seemed to have a life of its own. He sat behind a desk piled high with precarious towers of legal books and files, peering at me over a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "What can I do for you, son?" he asked, his voice a low grumble. He didn't seem impressed. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked to his desk and laid the manila folder on the only clear space available. Then I placed my mother's letter, the one with his name on it, on top. He stared at the folder, then at the letter, then back at me. His grumpy facade began to crumble. He picked up the letter, his hand shaking slightly, and read it. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a deep, weary sigh escaping his lips. "Sarah," he said, the name soft with old grief. "I'll be damned. She actually did it." He looked at me, his eyes sharp and assessing. "I told her she was crazy. I told her she was going to get herself killed going up against Northwood. She just smiled and told me some things were worth fighting for." He opened the folder and began to leaf through the documents. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression shifting from weary nostalgia to sharp, professional focus. He let out a low whistle. "Internal memos. Certified lab reports. She got them. She got it all." He was silent for a long time, just reading. The only sound in the office was the rustle of paper and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes shining with a new light. It wasn't cantankerous anymore. It was the look of a fighter who'd been given one last round. "Son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "your mother was one of the bravest women I ever met. She brought me this case years ago. We had suspicions, we had sick people, but we had no proof. Nothing we could take to court. Northwood's lawyers would have buried us. This," he tapped the folder, "this changes everything." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But you need to understand what you're doing. Northwood Ventures isn't just a quarry. They run this town. They have deep pockets and friends in high places. Coming after them will be like kicking a hornet's nest the size of this building. They'll come after you. They'll try to discredit you, threaten you, buy you off. Are you ready for that?" I thought of my mother, writing those letters alone in a hospital room. I thought of the $20,000 she left me, a choice between escape and ammunition. I thought of the key in my pocket, which had opened not just a cellar, but my entire life. "She didn't quit," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm not going to either." A slow smile spread across Arthur Gable's face. It transformed him, wiping away years of cynicism and fatigue. "Good," he said. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Your mother's fire. I see it." He stood up and extended a dry, wrinkled hand across the desk. "Welcome to the fight, Leo Vance. Let's get to work." The first few months were a blur of legal paperwork, late-night strategy sessions in Gable's dusty office, and the slow, arduous process of building a case. Gable filed the lawsuit, and just as he'd predicted, Northwood Ventures came out swinging. Their high-priced lawyers from the city filed motion after motion to dismiss, trying to bury us in paperwork and bleed us dry. They couldn't. My mother's inheritance, her ammunition, paid for our initial costs. News of the lawsuit spread through Coulter Creek like wildfire. At first, people were scared. They'd whisper when I walked into the diner. They'd cross the street to avoid me. Northwood was the town's biggest employer. To go against them was to risk your livelihood. But then, something started to shift. The receptionist at Gable's office, a woman named Doris, whose sister had died of the same cancer as my mother, started a quiet phone tree. An old farmer, whose well water had been foul for years, dropped off a box of sworn affidavits from his neighbors. The tired woman from the gas station on my first night slipped me a free coffee and whispered, "Keep fighting, kid. We're with you." It wasn't a floodgate, but it was a trickle, a slow, steady drip of courage that started to wear away at the town's fear. People started talking, sharing stories they had kept buried for years. Gable and I worked to gather their testimonies, adding them to the mountain of evidence my mother had built. Brenda called me once. I was staying in a small room I'd rented above the diner, using some of the money for living expenses. I almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number. "Leo? It's Brenda." Her voice was tight, strained. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. I heard what you're doing. You need to stop. You're making a mistake. Was it a mistake for my mother to die? For all those other people? That has nothing to do with you, she snapped. I got a visit from some men in suits, Leo. They asked about the property. They offered me money for it. A lot of money. They said it belonged to me now that your father is gone. The deed is in my name, I said calmly. It's mine. You told me yourself it was worthless. A bitter laugh crackled through the phone. Worthless. I should have known. You're just like her, stubborn and foolish. You have no idea what you're up against. Take the money they'll offer you and run. It's your only chance. No, I said, and the word felt solid, real. It was the first time I had ever said no to her and truly meant it. This is my home. I'm not running. I hung up the phone. I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I was a man with a purpose. My mother's purpose. The fight was far from over. It would be years of legal battles, of appeals and setbacks. But we had a foundation. We had the truth. And we had a town that was slowly finding its voice again. I spent my days working part-time at the hardware store and my evenings at Gable's office. On weekends, I went up to the property. I didn't have the money to build a house, but I started to clean it up. I cleared the brambles and weeds, mended the stone wall around the cellar entrance, and planted a small garden of wildflowers near the door. It wasn't a home in the traditional sense, not yet. It was more than that. It was an anchor, a memorial, a promise. One evening, I was sitting on the hillside, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool and clean. I thought about the word inheritance. When Brenda had thrown that deed at me, I thought it meant nothing. A piece of paper for a piece of dirt. I was wrong. My inheritance wasn't the land, or the money, or even the evidence in the box. It was the choice my mother gave me. It was the story she entrusted to me. It was the fire she passed on. An inheritance, I realized, isn't just something you are given. It's something you decide to carry. It's a responsibility you choose to accept. For 18 years, I had felt adrift, a guest in my own life. I had no story, no history, no roots. I thought home was a building with 4 walls and a roof. But sitting there, on that quiet patch of earth, I understood. Home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you fight for. It's the community you build. It's the ground you refuse to surrender. The root cellar wasn't worthless. It was the deepest root of all. It was where my life, my real life, had finally begun. And that's the story of how I found my way home. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The legal battle with Northwood Ventures stretched on for 3 more years. We won, eventually. A settlement that established a medical fund for the affected families and forced the company to fund a massive environmental cleanup of the river. It wasn't perfect, but it was justice. Arthur Gable retired a local hero. The town started to heal. I never built a house on that land. Instead, with the town's help, we turned it into a small community park, a quiet place of remembrance. We named it Sarah's Garden. I still live in Coulter Creek. I took some college courses online and eventually took over the hardware store when the old owner retired. I'm part of the town council now, making sure no one ever has to fight a battle like my mother's alone again. So what's the lesson in all this? I think it's about value. We live in a world that is constantly telling us what is valuable and what is worthless. A person, a piece of land, a memory, a part of our own story. We're told to chase the money, the easy way out, the path of least resistance. But the things that truly matter, the things that define us, are often hidden. They're buried in dusty boxes, in forgotten places, in the stories no one wants to hear. Maybe you've been handed something in your life that everyone else told you was worthless. A dream they called foolish. A past they told you to forget. A part of yourself they told you to hide. Don't listen to them. Look closer. Dig deeper. That thing you were told to throw away might just be the key to everything. It might be your story. It might be your fire. It might be the place where you finally find your home. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to find the value in something everyone else dismissed, I'd be honored if you'd share a piece of that in the comments below. This channel is a community for people who understand that the hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful places. Your story matters. And if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, please consider subscribing. It means the world to me. Take care of yourselves, and never let anyone tell you what you're worth.